I lapped up the mushroom sauce like a husky dying of thirst. "Hello," said a voice behind me. I straightened with a jerk and turned around. I've seen only two spectacles during my various lives that impressed me as being flawlessly beautiful. One was a view from Mac's back of the ice mountains in the Antarctic Circle, illuminated by the aurora australis. The other, for all the embarrassment of the moment, was the sight of the girl Bluebear, standing in the doorway with a basket full of berries, smiling at me. I stammered, completely at a loss. She looked at me, and there was no surprise or fear in her gaze, still less annoyance or anger. On the contrary, she wore an expression entirely consistent with the emotions churning around in my own breast. It was the look of a girl Bluebear hopelessly in love. The whole distressing game of hide-and-seek had been quite unnecessary. We were destined for one another. We should live together forevermore. Here in this forest glade, or aboard a ship on the high seas, wheresoever fate chose to take us, I had found my niche in life. My everlasting quest was at an end. Only 3 paces separated me from my future happiness. Throwing off all my timidity, I strode boldly over and folded her in my arms. She felt exceedingly thin and sticky, like a length of ship's rope smeared with tar. Indeed, she suddenly looked like a tarry rope as well. More precisely, the girl Bluebear had vanished, and in her place was a taut, sticky rope. The cottage, too, had disappeared into thin air. The clearing was still there, but it was empty save for some thin black ropes stretched out across it in a skillful, systematic way like a spider's web, and I was stuck fast to one of the ropes. From the Encyclopedia of Marvel's Life Forms and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Spider witch. The common spider witch, or witch spider, Tarantula valkyria, belongs to the family of 4-lunged megaspiders, e.g. the bird-eating spider, but attains at a considerably larger size. Its predatory techniques have never been fully investigated because no researcher has ever got near enough and lived to report his findings. The spider witch is classified among those ammonian life forms which employ unfair methods of luring their quarry, e.g. carnivorous oyster, the Gormetica insularis, and the venomous frog prince. The spider witch is usually black with dense, shaggy, reddish-brown, fox-red hair, coppery fur on the flattened extremities of its legs and palps. It is held in low esteem by other creatures because of its bad manners and malicious nature, one exception being the tarantula tick, a parasite that lives in its fur. Its bite, depending on the victim's size, can be innocuous, injurious to health, or absolutely fatal. An adult bolog, for example, will scarcely notice its bite, whereas a 200-foot-long water snail can suffer for several weeks from inflammation of the jaw area accompanied by dizzy spells and breathlessness. In creatures less than 50 feet long, the bite is not only lethal, but inevitably causes the victim to dissolve entirely into a viscous, readily digestible liquid similar in appearance to white of egg, which the spider witch sucks up with its mandibles. It can attain a height of 25 feet, has 4 to 8 legs depending on its age. It is born with 4 legs and acquires another pair every 100 years, 12 eyes, 4 bead-like mouths, and on top of its head a funnel-shaped, sharply tapering horn which vaguely resembles a witch's hat and is given its name. It probably uses this horn to skewer its victims and transport them to its storage net. The spider witch can excrete a sticky solution that induces delusions of a wish-fulfilling kind. In other words, hallucinations that conjure up a vision of what the victim most ardently desires. The spider witch coats its webs in this secretion. Because it cannot be fitted into any evolutionary pattern, the creature is assumed to have entered Zamonia by way of a comet strike or a dimensional hiatus. It nests exclusively in the great forest. That is why the reader is advised most strongly to give the place a wide berth. Many thanks, Professor Nightingale. I had learned all about the Great Forest at the Nocturnal Academy. I knew that it covered 17,000 square miles and was a densely wooded tract of land whose luxuriant forms of vegetation ranged from evergreen trees to mosses and subterranean truffles. I could cite the Latin names of every plant in the forest and ascertain the age of every tree by means of a bark analysis, but I did not learn that it was inhabited by an omnivorous spider witch until I woke in this web. I was probably the last person to grasp this fact, as many readers will have guessed. But love, as everyone knows, is blind. The beautiful girl Bluebear wasn't what she seemed. Not only was she no girl Bluebear, she wasn't even a girl or anything at all. She was merely an illusion, a figment of my imagination generated by the hypnotic vapors emanating from the fluid to which I was adhering. I thought I'd spent whole days in the clearing, whereas everything had occurred within the space of a few minutes or only seconds. I had probably hurled myself at the spider's sticky web with open arms, and now I was caught fast in it like a common housefly. I began by endeavoring to free my paws. The adhesive substance was viscous. I could move my paws a good inch to and fro, but I couldn't, however hard I tried, detach them from the web. I immobilized my reserves of optimism. Perhaps there wasn't any spider witch in this area. Perhaps it had merely spun a web and moved to another part of the forest. That was possible after all, wasn't it? Who was to say it would definitely return? From the Encyclopedia of Marvel's Life Forms and Other Phenomena of Zoomania and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Spider witch, the cunt. Once the spider witch has spun a web, it leaves it and goes off to spin more webs in other places. Thereafter, the creature checks its skillfully constructed traps for prey at regular intervals. It may be days or weeks before it returns to a web, but return it will, or that you may safely stake your last cent for your sanity and the health of your entire family. So I was hopelessly stuck, and the spider witch would beyond a doubt be coming back to liquidize me with its bodily fluids. What use was the encyclopedia in my head if it never supplied me with vital information until too late? Why hadn't Nightingale told us anything in class about spider witches and their hypnotic secretions? I was beginning to have considerable doubts about the Nocturnal Academy's educational system. The cobweb to end all cobwebs. I submitted the cobweb to detailed scrutiny for the first time. To give the spider witch its due, it was a masterpiece of the weaver's craft. The creature had not only stretched ropes taut between the trees and attached them to each other, but filled every interstice with smaller cobwebs, spun from threads of steadily diminishing thickness. If one looked very, very closely, one could see that these smaller cobwebs were themselves filled with even smaller ones, in which, if I'd had a magnifying glass, I would doubtless have discovered smaller ones still. Any living creature, be it never so microscopically small, would have been trapped by this diabolical snare. It wasn't just a cobweb, it was a work of genius. Had a cup been awarded for insidious trapping techniques, it would have gone to that treacherous snare. The spider appeared to devote its energies and intelligence to constructing these masterly examples of the predator's art, of which there were probably thousands in the great forest. No wonder these woods were now destitute of animals. The last surviving deer and bird, the last surviving beetle, butterfly, and mayfly must ultimately have become entangled in one of the spider witch's webs. It is doubtful if there is a more horrible way to die than in the mandibles of a spider witch. It is very carefully coats its victim in an acidic, nauseating fluid that begins by eating away the skin, and then, with excruciating lentitude, turns the flesh into porridge-like, readily digestible sludge. The victim experiences unendurable pain as his bones are, "Thanks very much, but I'd sooner not know all the gory details. It might be nice if the encyclopedia could give me a few practical tips from time to time, for instance on how to extricate oneself from a spider witch's web. Once a living creature has become entangled in a spider witch's web, only the spider itself can free it. This it does by means of the liquefactive process described in detail above. Where research into the relevant field is concerned, the spider witch's secretion is considered to be the undisputed king of liquid adhesives. There is no chemical, vegetable, or other compound that can dissolve the said secretion. That was nice to know. Not only was I trapped in the web of the Zemonian continent's most bestial life form, which would sooner or later pass by and turn me into porridge. No, it had also been scientifically demonstrated beyond a doubt that the adhesive imprisoning me was indissoluble, except by water. What? Except by water. Remarkably enough, only ordinary spring rain or tap water is capable of neutralizing the adhesive properties of the spider witch's secretion. Aha, water! There was water, certainly, a whole streamful of it, but all of 50 feet away. How could I get to it? Could the encyclopedia suggest some answer to this problem? Hello? Come in, encyclopedia. The forest remained silent. Perhaps the spider had only just spun its web and wouldn't return for a week or two at least. It might well rain in the interim. Then I could free myself with ease and quit the forest in a hurry. Great Forest, the continued. The Great Forest gets most of its water from the numerous underground streams that permeate the soil. It very seldom rains in the Great Forest, only in fact on the occasion of one of the rare Bloomberg tempests. If a Bloomberg tempest has just occurred, it may be months, if not years, before the next rain can be expected. Information of this kind was enough to brighten anyone's hopes. My optimism was gradually yielding to more realistic considerations. Perhaps the spider had spun of the web a long time ago and was coming to collect its prey at this moment. It It might even have been lurking in the undergrowth all this time, feasting its eyes on the sight of its helpless victim. What was that? Had I just heard a rustle in the bushes? No, of course not. I was well on the way to losing my mind from fear. It was only some branches stirring in the wind. There it was again. That wasn't the wind. Some leaves in the undergrowth across the way were waving to and fro in an unnatural manner. There was something alive in there. What sort of creature could it be? The great forest was deserted save for the spider witch and me. Another rustling sound, louder and more prolonged than before. The undergrowth parted, and an incredibly hideous, repulsive-looking creature slunk slowly towards me. It was no spider witch, it was a troglodyte, an old acquaintance. Ack, 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 he cackled. I may look like a troglodyte, but don't be misled. I'm really a forester, the great forester-in-chief. Incognito, of course, hence my deceptively genuine-looking troglodyte disguise. Does that sound relatively convincing, at least? Or should I admit right away that I'm a troglodyte? Cut it out, I snapped. I'm in an extremely unpleasant predicament. There's some water over there. If you'd be good enough to— One moment, the troglodyte broke in, lounging comfortably on the grass. How did you get into that mess? I mean, you've got to be pretty stupid to get caught in one of those things. I've seen them all over the forest, but I've never taken it into my head to try and kiss one. Ugh, it looks like a huge spider's web. Anyone who isn't absolutely cuckoo would give it a wide berth. It's a long story. I'm listening. This liquid here makes you think the web is the loveliest thing imaginable. Not a web at all. It positively hypnotizes you, and it's very hard to explain. How come you weren't taken in by one? The troglodyte sniffed a bit, then shrugged his shoulders. No idea, perhaps because I can't imagine anything lovely, just horrid, nasty things. Ack, ack. It doesn't matter anyway, not now. Would you be kind enough to scoop some water out of the stream and sprinkle it over my hands? It's the only thing that'll release me. Is that all? Just some water from the stream? Precisely, I'd be most grateful. All right, the gnome wagged his head and waddled over to the stream. Kneeling down, he cupped some water in his hands and carried it carefully over to me, like a waiter with a tray full of champagne glasses. Just before reaching the web, he stopped short. Hurry up, I called impatiently. What's wrong? I came within an ace of forgetting I'm a troglodyte. I'm behaving like a Boy Scout. That's neither here nor there, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible, because I already guessed which way the wind was blowing. Just bring the stuff here. The troglodyte let the water trickle slowly through his fingers into the grass. Phew, he said. I only just stopped myself in the nick of time. I very nearly performed a good deed. He wiped some imaginary sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Hey, would you please fetch some more water and release me at last? The spider may turn up at any moment. This is no joke. I'm not being funny. I'm a troglodyte. Don't tell me you've forgotten our little adventure in the mountains. No, I haven't forgotten it, but I forgive you. Leading someone astray is rather different from leaving them to be devoured by a giant spider. You wouldn't do a thing like that. Yes, I would. It's my job. You wouldn't. Now listen, my boy, said the troglodyte, very serious all of a sudden, and there was a look of genuine regret in his eyes. You don't seem to grasp what a fix you're in. I'm a troglodyte, the most abominable creature in Zamonia. I couldn't help you even if I wanted to, which I don't. It's simply not in my nature. All I want and all I can do is to not help you. In present circumstances, I'm the most treacherous person you could possibly have met. I mean, it would be only too easy for me to help you. Child's play, in fact. But I won't. Lurking back there in the forest is a giant spider as big as a house, and all I'd have to do to save you is fetch a little water, but I'd sooner leave you to your uncertain, no, your absolute certain fate. Only a troglodyte could do that. You've got a greater chance of being released by the spider itself than a troglodyte. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. And the troglodyte disappeared in the undergrowth. I'm really sorry, he called. That is to say, I'm not even that. Ack, ack, ack. I flew into a rage I'd never thought myself capable of. Shrieking and vituperating, I tore at the spider's web and yelled curses so vile that not even as hated creature as the troglodyte had heard them before. Neither had I. Seemingly endowed with my maniacal fury, with colossal strength, I wrenched at the sticky rope until the anchor's trees shook, tugged at the cobweb until the blood pounded in my temples. I did, in fact, stretch a little and become steadily thinner. I tugged still harder, emitting noises like a weightlifter on the verge of rupturing himself. The spider's rope became as thin as a silken thread, expanded until it was almost invisible. But it didn't snap. My strength eventually deserted me, and the thread contracted into a thick rope once more. I roared and raved, hurled imprecations after the troll, assured him that I would pursue him to all eternity, and described what I would do to him. I kicked up what was probably the loudest din in the great forest had heard in its many thousands of years of existence. until it suddenly dawned on me that what I was really doing, in other words, personally ringing the spider witch's dinner bell. Nowhere does a noise sound louder than in a forest where no other noises can be heard. It might be thought that a mountain valley or a cathedral could produce the loudest echoes, but they only sound far more impressive in deserted woods, undiluted by the hooting of owls or the rustle of insects or other noises. They rebound from tree to tree, leaf to leaf, pine needle to pine needle, until they combine to produce a monster of a sound far louder than their original cause. That is frightening enough in itself, but in this case there isn't just a monster of sound, there is the sound of a monster. Spiders move silently as a rule, but that applies only to the lightweights. I was here dealing with a 3-ton spider, and I could already hear it in the distance as it drove its yards-long legs into the forest floor like a pile driver. At first the ground just vibrated gently, but then my ears detected an 8-fold tread that seemed to be making for me fast and purposefully. Boom! 1, boom! 2, boom! 3, boom! 4, boom! 5, boom! 6, boom! 7, boom! 8. 8 booms, 8 legs, so the spider was fully mature. Sailing over the clearing at an altitude of several miles was a tiny rain cloud, probably a belated leftover from the Bluebear tempest. I stared at this cloud. Perhaps I could persuade it to shed a few drops by telekinesis. I stared until my eyes almost popped out of my head. I commanded it again and again to rain on the spot. For a moment it seemed to pause immediately overhead, perhaps because the wind had dropped, but then it sailed blithely on until it disappeared behind the canopy of foliage, leaving nothing behind but clear blue sky. That was probably the last chance of rain for months to come, if not years. Boom! Water! Boom! Water! Boom! Water! Boom! Water! Boom! Water! Boom! Water! Boom! Boom! Water! 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 Like a man dying of thirst, I could think of nothing else. From the Encyclopedia of Marvel's Life Forms and Other Phenomena of Zirconia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Water is ammonium, and ammonia, water, occurs in many very different life forms, not only as a liquid, but also as a solid, ice, or as a vapor, mist. Solidified water, a rarer variety, is a byproduct of aquashews, Professor Nightingale's solid soup. The largest reservoir in ammonia is the Zirconian Sea, which surrounds the continent. Though this is hard to render drinkable and must be desalinated at greater expense. Boom, 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 boom. For this reason, drinking water is extracted mainly from rivers, lakes, and underground watercourses. Sweet water is found exclusively in the subterranean caverns of the Demerara Desert, red and green water in the caves beneath the Muchwater marshes, where it is a product of the discoloration caused by slipper animalcules during the mating season. Boom, 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 boom. Magnetic spring water, which can flow up hills, is sometimes found on the slopes of the Bluebear Mountains, which have a substantial iron content. The Trappist monks of the Church of the Chastened Chestnut use this water to make their so-called uphill beer, intending to revolutionize the brewing industry and facilitate consumption. It was hoped that a tankard need only be put to the drinker's lips, not tilted. Their experiment was an abysmal failure, however, because the beer rose into the air of its own accord and floated off into the blue. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. The encyclopedia's useless items of information were only making my situation worse. I would have given anything to be able to switch it off. Birolanian birch water, which is sometimes excreted during heat waves by the Birolanian birch, is regarded in certain circles as a sacred liquid endowed with a miraculous ability to cure incurable diseases. Other natural sources of liquid for use in an emergency include rain clouds, the morning dew on vegetable foliage, pressed cacti, cometer humps, the human tears and saliva, which are 90% water. Tears, saliva, and my own body consisted largely of water. All I needed to do was spit. Incredible how slowly one's mind works, especially in situations of the utmost urgency. So I collected some saliva in my mouth. That is to say, I tried to collect some, but failed. My throat was absolutely parched. Terror had transformed my mouth into a draught area. My tongue was as dry and rough as a sheet of emery paper. My gums were parchment-like. The saliva seemed to have hidden away in my pores for fear of the spider witch. I found it quite impossible to coax so much as a droplet to the surface. Boom, 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 boom. But tears? All I had to do was cry. I had not only learned to weep to order, but promoted weeping to the status of an art form. I was a champion, no, the world champion at that form of activity, except that I hadn't engaged in it for some time, and the situation in which I found myself made concentration difficult. With the sound of its footsteps, the spider witch had almost reached the clearing. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. So I mentally squeezed my tear ducts as hard as I could. I pictured scenes of almost unimaginable grief, incidents of profoundly tragic nature, the funerals of my best friends, even my own, but I was quite simply out of practice. Or was it that I was older? A youngster weeps at the drop of a hat. But when you're older, the tears flow rather less easily. Was I still capable of weeping? Boom, 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 boom. Boom! The final boom dispelled my last remaining doubt that the spider witch had reached the clearing. I couldn't see the whole of it yet, just one of its 8 eyes peering through the foliage, probably to see what was struggling in its web. Then it squeezed the upper part of its body through the tree tops. Pus yellow spittle was oozing from a spout in its belly, presumably the deadly secretion that would dissolve me. And then for the first time I heard the spider witch's voice, a sound that deprived me of hope. It might have been made by all the dangerous representatives of the animal kingdom all at once. It combined the menacing growl of a tiger with the venomous hiss of a cobra, the derisive cackle of an evil spirit, and the hoarse laugh of a hyena, the sound of a vampire bat greedily drinking. It sent shivers down my spine and brought tears of terror to my eyes. I started to weep not deliberately or in simulated sorrow, but from genuine, hopeless, mortal fear. The tears spurted from my eyes in 2 thin streams, but I still had just enough presence of mind to aim them at my imprisoned hands. But for whatever reason, whether I was squinting from sheer terror or sobbing so hard that my body was shaking, the jet missed them by a good 6 inches. There are times in life when you become convinced that the entire universe has assembled in some gloomy back room and resolved to conspire against you. This was one of these times, but there are also times that restore your faith in Lady Luck. The 2 or 3 seconds it took for my tears, having shot past their target, to rebound off the petals of an orange lily to the branch of a birch tree, which bent and then released a captive fern frond, which sprang erect and projected my tears at a canopy of chestnut leaves, laden with raindrops from the recent Gloomberg tempest, which in turn sent them pattering down on me like a cold morning shower. Those seconds were one such fortunate moment in time. It was the moment when fate released my hands from the spider's web and signaled the start of my marathon run through the great forest. My marathon escape from the great forest. The first hour. I had ever run in my life, if the truth be told. The mini pirate's ship was too cramped, and Hobgoblin Island too cluttered with fallen trees. Running was out of the question on my raft. The most I ever did on Gourmet Island was take a leisurely stroll, in the end on all fours. My time with Mac was spent entirely in the air, and the Nocturnal Academy's curriculum did not include athletics, so I was obliged to run for the first time in my life, and not only run, but no half measures, run for my life. I got into a long-distance frame of mind, knowing that the key to my success was either greater speed or greater stamina. I realized at the same time that the dice were loaded against me. Being a bear, not an antelope, I had 2 short, relatively unathletic hind legs. The spider's legs were not very long, but 8 in number. Off I ran, fast enough to put a safe distance between me and the spider, but not too fast, for fear of getting out of breath. My main advantage was my size, because I could slip between trees and under branches, whereas the spider had to forge a laborious path through all that, barred its path, dense foliage, forked branches, close-set tree trunks, by trampling them underfoot or wrenching them apart. The creature's strength was prodigious. Its body weight alone was sufficient enough to bend aside full-grown spruce like a reed, but its progress was forever being obstructed. It had to barge its way through the forest in a zigzag fashion, whereas I had a cleared run. Things would have been different in the open countryside, where its long legs would soon have decided the issue. The secret of running is breathing. Breathe in 2 strides, breathe out 2 strides. Arms slightly bent, hands clenched in front of the chest. Push off the ball of each foot in turn. The first hour was no problem. I ran steadily, lively, through the trees, with the strength of youth in my heels and fear, a great incentive at my back. I obviously had a natural talent for running. My lead increased minute by minute. The spider lost ground yard by yard. Sooner or later I felt sure I would fall behind completely and abandon the chase. After an hour of this endurance run, its footsteps rang more faintly in my ears. Boom, 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 boom. The second hour was easier still. I felt it as if my body were manufacturing renewed energy out of the fresh air and pumping it straight into my legs through my veins. I became positively intoxicated. My stride steadily lengthened. My confidence grew. The longer I ran, the greater my reserves of energy seemed to become. The more energy I consumed, the more I acquired. Stopping to rest was pointless. It only made you wearier, prevented you from getting back into your stride again. I even put on speed. The spider witch fell further and further behind. Boom, 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 boom. The third hour. The third hour wasn't quite as easy. I began to sweat more profusely than I'd ever done, even in the most tropical of heat. The salty fluid streamed down me, but didn't fall to the ground. It remained lodged in my fur because I had no chance to pause for a few moments and shake it off. This increased my body weight considerably, making me feel as if I were swathed in wet hand towels. The sweat sometimes obscured my view for seconds at a time, and I had to be careful not to collide with a tree. But I still felt confident of winning the race, even though the spider had made up some ground. Its footsteps were unmistakably louder again. Boom, 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 boom. The fourth hour. The fourth hour was a definite improvement, perhaps because I had ceased to feel my body. I had become no more than a soaring incorporeal spirit that glided over the forest floor like a hovercraft. There were two possibilities. Either my body had triumphed over pain and exhaustion, or the likelier alternative, I suspected it had come to a halt at some stage and sat down because I couldn't feel it anymore. But I continued to run on in spirit, and my spirit was as swift as the wind. Spider was now almost out of earshot. Boom, 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 boom. The fifth hour. By the fifth hour, I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. There were times when I almost stopped running from sheer bewilderment, only to be preserved from disaster by my intellect, which fortunately took over just in time. My mind was in the strangest state. I suffered from increasing delusions of grandeur. I actually believed at times that the forest existed solely to provide me with a marathon course. My weightless body soared higher and higher, and before long I could survey the entire forest. I felt sure I was monitoring its every movement, determining the direction of every root, the growth and density of every stalk of grass, every leaf and branch throughout its extent. Then I rose still higher until, as if looking down through a giant magnifying glass, I could see the whole of Zamonia and make out each of the living creatures that inhabited it at all of whose names I knew and whose destinies I sagely directed. Eventually I soared into space and looked down on the entire planet, expertly superintending its rotation and gravitational pull, and sending a hurricane or two across the oceans. From the Encyclopedia of Marvels, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale, Marathon Fever, a rare condition observable only in Zamonian marathon runners. After some 5 hours of strenuous marathon running in the atmosphere prevailing in Zamonian mixed forest, with its extremely high oxygen content, the body temperature rises to 113 degrees Fahrenheit in a person in a standing or recumbent position. This would be fatal, and someone engaged in running it merely releases so-called basirs into the blood. In other words, bacillum-like corpuscles, productive of temporary delusions when they reach the brain. Far from putting marathon runners at a disadvantage, however, these help to desensitize them against their natural exhaustion and spur them on to further feats of athleticism. The said hallucinations are all of a pleasant nature, being associated with rapid progress. Those who have them tend to imagine that they are creatures noted for their speed, e.g. gazelles, cheetahs, or swallows. In my case, I probably imagine myself to be a weakened forest deity, but what did that matter as long as the delusion made me run faster? By now the spider witch had become a matter of complete indifference to me. Was it still within earshot? Boom, 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 boom. The 6th hour. In the 6th hour I regained possession of my mind and my body, the former being clearer and the latter heavier than ever before. I felt I was toting a sack of cement. My legs seemed to be filled with lead, and the sweat clinging to my fur weighed me down. I stumbled along half-dazed and bereft of all my former self-confidence. The marathon fever had evaporated. My delusions of grandeur had yielded to a more realistic appraisal of the situation. This told me that my strength was giving out, and that the spider witch had definitely made up some ground. Boom, 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 the 7th hour. During the 7th hour, the light began to fade and the forest was traversed by a refreshing breeze that dried my sweat and restored my energies. When nightfall came darkness. My eyesight has always been good, even in poor light, as I demonstrated in the Bloomberg Mountains. Moreover, a seaman's innate bump of direction and an exceedingly keen sense of smell enabled me to move as confidently as a bat in almost total darkness. I smell trees before I collide with them, and my internal compass always steers me in the most favorable direction. instincts which only a Bluebear possesses. Furthermore, I could clearly hear the spider witch engage its distance from me when it crashed through the forest like a giant on stilts, especially as it couldn't suppress its furious snarls and greedy slobbering sounds. I mustered all my strength for a final spurt. I would either shake off the spider witch once and for all or be devoured by it. I was staking everything on a single throw of the dice. My education at the Nocturnal Academy, and particularly my lessons in biology, now paid off. I twisted and turned like a rabbit, dived down holes like a fox, sprinted like a zebra in flight. I flitted across the forest floor, zigzagging like a lizard, or disappeared completely into dense foliage and wriggled through it like a grass snake. But the spider's 8 eyes enabled it to find its way in the dark, at least as well as I could. Its greatest advantage, however, was the spare which spurred it on to unprecedented feats. It was ages since anyone apart from me had strayed into the great forest, so the creature's last meal lay far in the past. Spiders can survive on their accumulated food for immense periods of time, but sooner or later the last calorie is consumed. If I escaped the spider witch's clutches now, it would not have the strength to lure and ensnare another victim. Least of all, after expending so much energy on this marathon, I would have to crawl back into the forest empty-handed and starve to death there. I could clearly hear it trying to put on a spurt. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, the 8th hour. Meantime, I was no longer capable of switching just like that from one escape technique to the other. I wasn't a weasel or a gazelle, I was a bear, and bears are essentially slow-moving creatures and like to take things easy. My legs were dragging me down like ship's anchors, and every muscle in my body hurts in its own particular way. Worst of all, though, was the voice inside me which kept urging me to let everything go hang and take a nap. The spider witch had long ago sensed my weakness and summoned up its remaining strength. This quickly reduced my lead. The creature felled whole rows of trees with a single scything blow, and its claw-tipped feet, ripped bushes out of the ground with its pincer-like jaws, and hurled imprecations into the darkness and spider witch. It made up a lot of ground while I cursed my plan to stake everything on a single throw, because my strength was really giving out at last. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. I continued to drag myself along, though exhaustion was depriving me of my natural instincts. I bumped into trees, tripped over roots, and got tangled up in undergrowth. I made a little headway, whereas the spider witch was steadily reducing the distance between us. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. The spider witch was right behind me now. Only a single arachnidian stride from its coveted prey. The whole marathon run had been a futile waste of energy. I was debating whether to simply stand my ground and face up to the creature. I might, with luck, achieve something in a straight fight if it was more exhausted than I, when I detected a strange but familiar scent. That's odd, I thought. There's a smell of gin. Where, I wondered, had I heard that peculiar word? Just as I remembered, I fell head first into a dimensional hiatus. 8. My life in the dimensional hiatus. When you stumble into a dimensional hiatus, you fall in every direction at once, down, up, right, left, north, south, east, west. You also fall through time, not only in reverse, but at twice the speed of light, following a trajectory known as the Nightingalean octaval loop. Professor Nightingale's was the first, as usual, to describe this phenomenon. The Nightingalean octaval loop should be conceived of as a double loop in the shape of an eightfold figure of 8, in which 1/8 is situated in space, 1/8 in time, and the remaining 6/8 of the other 6 dimensions. This means that while falling, you're everywhere in the universe at every point in time. This process is very confusing at first, and the reader will be well advised not to try to form a mental picture of the multi-dimensional space. It has been estimated that even a nocturnomath would take an entire lifetime to picture even 1 square yard of it. From the Encyclopedia of Marvel's Lifeforms and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Multidimensional space. It is really quite easy to picture a square yard of multidimensional space, provided you have 7 brains. Simply picture a train traveling through a black hole with a candle on its roof, while you yourself with a candle on your head are standing on Mars and winding a clock precisely 1 yard in diameter, and while an owl, which also has a candle on its head and is traveling in the opposite direction to the train at the speed of light, is flying through a tunnel in the process of being swallowed by another black hole, which likewise has a candle on its head, if you can imagine a black hole with a candle on its head. Though for that you will require at least 4 brains. Join up the 4 points at which the candles are burning using a colored pencil, and you'll have 1 square yard of multidimensional space. You will also coincidentally be able to tell time on Mars by the clock, even in the dark, because of course you've got a candle on your head. So you're everywhere in the world at once, in the Alps and on the Atlantic Ocean, at the North Pole and in the Gobi Desert, on the Nile and in the Brazilian rainforest. You're also, as already mentioned, present at every point in time. To cite a few alternatives, 1 million years ago and the day after tomorrow at 3:30, in the autumn and springtime and summertime at Christmas, and 100 or 100,000 years from now. But you're not only on Earth, you're also on the Moon and on Saturn, and in the Horsehead Nebula and on Cassiopeia Starry Throne, on the far side of Betelgeuse and beneath the wings of Pegasus, on the left horn of Taurus and the constellation of Cancer, and everywhere else unknown in the universe. And just to make matters even more puzzling, you're in every other unknown universe as well, so anyone falling down a dimensional hiatus really goes places, everywhere to be exact. This deluge of optical stimuli would normally drive a person insane, but the brain's response to fall down a dimensional hiatus is remarkable self-protective. It lapses into a state of mild dementia, or as Professor Nightingale has termed it, carefree catalepsy. From the Encyclopedia of Marbles, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zoomonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Carefree catalepsy, the muscular and cerebral paralysis into which one's mind and body subside when confined to a dimensional hiatus for a considerable length of time. The state is almost complete physical and mental torpor. Renders one unimpressed by anything, even a plunge down a dimensional hiatus. The body is pervaded by an agreeable feeling of lassitude. The ears become abnormally hot, and the face takes on a broad, fatuous grin. This condition is very distantly related to the state of helpless ecstasy engendered by 360-degree loops on a roller coaster. Such was my condition when I encountered QWERTY. I was roaming the constellation of Orion, and QWERTY was clearly still in freefall in the dimensional hiatus into which I had pushed him. Either that or he'd fallen down another one, since anyone in a dimensional hiatus is everywhere at the same time, as I've already said. It was really only a matter of time before we met up again. QWERTY came sailing weightlessly towards me in slow motion, revolving on its own axis, and gave me a foolish grin as he sailed past. Like me, he was obviously in a state of carefree catalepsy, hence our remarkably blasé reaction to this incredible coincidence. "Hi, QWERTY," I called. "Hi, Bluebear," he called back in a casual wave. Then he sailed on towards the Rigel Nebula, while I zoomed off in the opposite direction. Now that it had taken place, the fantastic incident completely banished the possibility that our paths might cross again somewhere, at least according to the general laws of probability. The condition known as carefree catalepsy even enables a person to sleep while falling through a dimensional hiatus. Indeed, it's positively soporific. I became more and more sleepy as I plummeted through endless universal space. My eyelids drooped and I sank into a sleep filled with dreams of just about everyone who had played a role, however minor, in my life to date. Many pirates bellowed pirate sea shanties, babbling billows sloshed past hobgoblins, whispered requests for encores. I plunged again and again into the jaws of the Gormetica and was rescued from them each time by Mac. Freda bombarded me with meteorites. Professor Nightingale rode past on his Nightingalator, brains clicking furiously. A mountain maggot nibbled an iron moon, and needless to say, the Troglotroll also sailed past, waving amiably. But there were also creatures and things I'd not yet encountered. Black-clad figures riding beasts like camels. A floating city, a head the size of a mountain, and an endless stream of fantastic, simultaneously frightening and fascinating life forms, giants, dwarfs, and demons, monstrous worms, and huge avian predators. At the time I took this to be an incoherent phantasmagoria, but I realized now that I was dreaming of my future. Then I was jolted awake by an ear-splitting blast on a horn. No, in reality I was still dreaming, because now it was the Moloch I encountered for a second time. The ship seemed very real. I could even see the underside of her vast hull, which was overgrown with coral reefs, shellfish cities, and forests of seaweed. Escorting her through the universe were thousands of sharks, jellyfish, and moray eels. That is how you soar through time and space, in a state midway between dreaming and carefree catalepsy, until you suddenly tumble through one of an unimaginable number of dimensional hiatuses and emerge at some point in the cosmos. I wondered where that point would be. Not, I hoped, in another dimension. From the Encyclopedia of Marbles, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamodia and its environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Dimensional hiatuses. Anyone venturing into a dimensional hiatus should realize in advance that everything in an alien dimension can be fundamentally different. It may lack something important, air for example, or the atmosphere may consist of water or lead or concrete. The laws of nature that prevail there may be quite different from our own. There may be no gravity, no time, or no space. Another dimension could, for instance, consist of congealed boredom or musical frigidity, a lethal poison gas, or a solar temperature registering many thousands of degrees, or high-voltage electricity, or unfulfilled wishes. There are said to be dimensions in which sorrow is staple food for creatures that vegetate in little pools of grief. Many dimensions are so tiny, many dimensions with very, very small natural laws, that our planet would be compressed to the size of a pinhead on entering them. Others again are so big that their atoms are bigger than our native planet. There are some dimensions in which only thoughts can survive, and others inhabited exclusively by unpleasant sensations like hunger or envy, or in the form of little red pretzels that can sing. Anything is possible. Land in a two-dimensional dimension, and you're squashed as flat as a pancake. A one-dimensional dimension will stretch you like an endless rubber band. A five-dimensional one will transform you into a radio wave with a headache. As for an eighth-dimensional dimension, its appearance cannot be conveyed in our language. Only one thing is certain: those who enter another dimension must change their way of life, possibly in the most drastic manner. In another dimension. When I came tumbling out of the dimensional hiatus, I felt as if a hand had reached down my throat into my stomach and turned me inside out like a wet sock. I can't think of a less distasteful simile. I turned a few somersaults, first through the air and then across the ground before I came to rest. I sat on my backside, trying hard not to be sick, and looked down at the surface I'd landed on to see what it was made of. It's extremely important to know what material the surface of alien dimension consists of when you land on it. If it's concrete, for example, you can expect relatively stable natural conditions. If it's lava or cometary gas, you're done for. The ground beneath me was not only soft, but strewn with artistic designs. It was a carpet. Very long and some 100 yards wide, it was flanked by yawning expanses of outer space. Other strips of carpet crisscrossed the dimension with intergalactic motorways covered with pretty patterns, and flying carpets were zooming around all over the place. About 100 yards from me stood a magnificent throne. Still rather dazed, I got up and tried to adjust my clothing. Then someone nudged me from behind and I turned around. It was Qwerty Eeyop. Actually, it wasn't Qwerty Eeyop. It was someone who looked very like him, but so did the 200,000 odd other creatures arrayed on the strip of carpet behind me. These endless rows of gelatinous, QWERTY-like figures pulled me back ever further into their wobbly ranks. It seemed that I had been blocking their view of the throne, which they considered very important for some reason. That apart, they didn't take umbrage at my presence. A group right next to me struck up a kind of tune. Not only did it sound awful, but this is the gospel truth, they played it on instruments made of milk. Then a great commotion arose, and thrusting its way through the restless crowd came a little procession. At its head, and this time I was sure of it, marched Qwerty. You can recognize your very best friend when you see him, and even in the midst of the 200,000 look-alikes, I called his name, but my voice was drowned by the general tumult, and I was pushed back still further. Qwerty oozed majestically along, then detached himself from the crowd, slowly and deliberately approached the throne. The music took on a dramatic flavor, which made it sound even more frightful than before. Qwerty couldn't possibly have heard me above the din, so I wormed my way forwards and went up to him. A historic moment. How it had happened I couldn't tell, but I had obviously landed in this dimension just as he was about to be crowned. I had to get to him before he fell into the dimensional hiatus. An angry murmur ran through the crowd as I hurried towards him, but Qwerty couldn't hear that either. The music was too loud. Tremendously excited, no doubt, he continued to make for the throne. I was just behind him, so close that I could almost have grabbed him. When my foot caught in a fold of carpet, I stumbled, nearly lost my balance, and blundered into Qwerty from behind. Propelled by me, he rolled into the edge of the carpet, toppled off it into space, and vanished into thin air. The crowd froze, the music died away. I went to the edge of the carpet and stared helplessly into the void. There was a faint smell of gin. It wasn't Qwerty who had tripped, as he had always believed. It was me. I was responsible for his having landed in our dimension. In purely mathematical terms, the most improbable happening in the universe, and one that no one could credit. But now the crowd was wobbling angrily towards me. Without a moment's hesitation, I launched myself in his face. From the Encyclopedia of Marvels, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamodia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Equitemporal Tunneling of Dimensions, the The time known to us is divided into earlier and later, now and immediately, shortly and previously, yesterday and today, tomorrow, soon, eventually, at one time, finally, ultimately, formerly, hitherto, and meanwhile. But all of these junctures once occurred in the present and will sometime be in the past, after a considerable period in the old days, or to use somewhat more old-fashioned terminology, in days of yours. How can this be? It's hard to say. The only certainty is that dimensions are connected by tunnels whose entrances and exits are dimensional hiatuses, and that time flows back and forth through these tunnels from one dimension to another. This may provide an answer to the major question of how time can vanish while remaining omnipresent. I hope this affords the reader a reasonably satisfactory explanation how I was able to participate in a future event that had taken place not only in the past but in another dimension. I myself was temporarily less preoccupied with this problem than interested in the knowing where I would land at this time. After the incredible coincidence that had landed me in Cordy's dimension, my chances of emerging in my own native dimension were very slim, indeed absolutely nil. From the Encyclopedia of Marvel's Life Forms and Other Phenomena of Zimonia and its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale, dimensional hiatuses continued. Once a person has traveled from one dimension to another, returning by the same route is the unlikeliest thing that could happen to him. In the known dimensional system, the odds against his landing in the original dimension are a nightillion to 1. A nightillion? Nightillion, a mathematical unit of measurement first computed by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. A nightillion is a quantity unimaginable by the normal brain, only by one that has at least 6 ancillary brains. In common parlance, a nightillion signifies inconceivably many. I went plunging down through the depths of the cosmos. To be absolutely honest, I didn't find this journey half as exciting as the first. Once you've seen one spiral nebula, you've seen them all, you know what they look like, so a repeat performance isn't anything like as thrilling. Like an old space flight pro, I was preparing myself for a longish but of carefree catalepsy, when my descent was abruptly cut short and I tumbled out into another dimension. I realize that I'm running the risk of losing my last well-disposed reader, but I have a duty to tell the truth that can only report what actually happened. I popped out of the very same dimensional hiatus into which I had originally fallen. This was not only the most improbable of all the possibilities in the universe, but the most unpleasant. Why? Because the spider witch would be waiting for me outside the hole, and the odds against my escaping it had been drastically shortened, not lengthened, by my fall. Already exhausted by my marathon run, I had since been subjected to the stress of falling through a dimensional hiatus. In any case, my existence between the dimensions was at an end. Had it been the longest or the shortest of my lives to date? Hard to say, both perhaps, but there was no spider witch in sight. Nor was it night time, as it had been when I fell down the hole, but broad daylight. Same place, different time. It would, after all, have been a truly impossible coincidence had I tumbled out of the dimensional hiatus at the very same moment in time. That simple fact accounted for the spider's absence. I had emerged on another occasion. It was another day, perhaps, another week, another month, a year or a century later, or a million years earlier. Any juncture in history would be possible. The spider had gone, that was the main thing. Perhaps it had crawled back into the forest to die of starvation. Perhaps it had yet to be born. Perhaps it had tumbled into the dimensional hiatus after me and was sailing through outer space. Best of all, perhaps it was even now cooking in a primeval lake of boiling pitch, or would be in the future devoured by monsters still more frightful than itself. But one shouldn't bear a grudge. It was conceivable, though not very probable, that the creature that had found its way back into the dimension from which, according to Professor Nightingale's theory, its ancestors had come. The universe abounds in possibilities. For all that, I hurriedly proceeded to quit the sinister forest. The trees became steadily sparser, and within an hour I reached the edge. A curtain seemed to part, disclosing a view of the new world. I was looking down a pale brown, apparently endless plain, whose extremities melted indistinguishably into the sky. There wasn't a single tree or mountain for as far as the eye could see. This was quite all right with me after the dire experiences I'd previously undergone in mountainous or wooded areas. I was completely dehydrated, so I replenished my reserves at a forest spring and drank greedily and noisily for minutes on end. Then I made my way down a hill and across some withered grass until I reached the edge of the great plain. The surface consisted of very fine, brown, sticky sand that smelt of vanilla. I stuck a paw out and tasted some. It was pleasantly sweet. This had to be the Demerara Desert of which Nightingale had told us in class. Somewhere over there, at the far end of that desert, Atlantis must lie. I wanted to go there. Before I could set out on such a hazardous trek, With all its predictable hardships, I needed a whole capful of sleep. I simply stretched out on the soft, sugary sand. The sun was high, but I was too exhausted for that to matter. While slowly drifting off, I reflected on my somewhat unusual situation and tried to gauge whether it should be deemed good or bad. I didn't even know if I was in the future, the past, or the present. There were only two certainties. First, that I was in my home dimension, and secondly, that I was in Zamonia. That, at least, was encouraging. Furthermore, I hadn't arranged to meet anyone. My past lay behind me, my future ahead, and I had no commitments either way, so it didn't really matter where the date was. Consoled by that thought, I fell asleep. "9. My Life in the Demerara Desert." From the Encyclopedia of Marbles, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Demerara Desert. The. Most deserts are wide, flat tracts of land rendered largely deficient in vegetation by lack of water, except in places where underground springs favor the development of oases. Deserts are divided according to their nature into rocky, sandy, salty, or sweet deserts. The Demerara Desert, a mixed desert of the latter category, consists of the Precambrian shell limestone, early Zamonian lava flour, and prehistoric sugar, with a thermal value of 55,000 calories per cubic yard. The sugar derives from an expansive wild sugar cane, which thousands of years of exposure to sunlight has concentrated into pure crystalline cane sugar. The basic the basic constitution of the Demerara Desert is a sweetish-tasting carbohydrate, soluble in water and alcohol, but not in either, which forms ozones when mixed with phenylhydrazine. These, depending on the number of carbon atoms in the molecule, may be trioses, tetroses, pentoses, hexoses, heptoses, octoses, or nonoses. Because of the baking properties of their staple material, the Demerara Desert surface formations are far more divisive and bizarre than those of other deserts. The wind, which both accumulates sugar dust and disperses it, makes a major contribution to the Demerara Desert's sculptural appearance. It can pick up sugar, transport it through the air for many miles. It can add it to an existing sugar sculpture, only to erode parts of the formation a few hours later. Thus, the outward appearance of the Demerara Desert changes continuously and far more dramatically than that of other deserts. If the air is moist enough and the wind strong enough, they can produce works of art that would turn away any sculptor green with envy. The fanciful appearance with this expansive desert has always attracted adventurers, gamblers, and other rootless individuals who prefer disorder to order. Many have gone off into the Demerara Desert to seek their fortune, but very few have ever returned, and many of those who did were in a state of mental derangement, a rude awakening. I was awakened by the spider witch. It was standing right over me when I opened my eyes. All I saw at first, being dazzled by the sunlight, was its long, thin, hairy legs. With relish, the creature dribbled some of its secretion right into my face. The corrosive process was already underway because I couldn't move so much as a finger. Perhaps my body had already been destroyed, or was at least half dissolved. I tried to scream, but even that was too much for me. Then I woke up properly. A friendly camedary was standing over me on its thin, rickety legs, licking my face. From the Encyclopedia of Marbles, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Camedary, the hoofed mammal belonging to the suborder known as Tylopoda. The hybrid offspring of a camel and a dromedary, the camedary possesses all the attributes of both animals and thus has 3 humps. Some 10 feet long from the muzzle to tail, it's sensationally unintelligent but capable of carrying heavy loads in extreme desert temperatures. Its 3 humps enable it to store immense quantities of water, and it can, if need be, work flat out for as long as 3 weeks without taking a drink. Situated on the humps are especially bred teats from which, with a modicum of skill, drinking water can be extracted. Camedaries vary in appearance between plug ugly and plain stupid, although they seem far from ideal mounts. What with their matted coats, shambling gait, half-closed eyes, and irksome bleating voices, they are faithful and amiable by nature, can easily be ridden with the aid of a crude bridle, and have no dietary fads. What is more, their dung makes excellent fuel. Camedaries are bred by the Mugs, a nomadic tribe that has roamed the Demerara Desert from time immemorial, reputedly in search of a legendary city named Anagromataf. The next thing I saw once I had rubbed the sleep out of my eyes was a trio of figures, attired from head to foot in dark blue robes. Protruding from the eye holes in each robe were two little telescopes. One of the figures bent over me. "A Bluebear," he said, more to his companions than to me. "How muggly!" I got to my feet at last and brushed the sugar dust from my fur. Not far away I saw more such figures in dark blue robes, 500 of them perhaps, and at least as many camaderies. "Who are you, if I may make so bold?" I murmured with the fearless torpor of someone just roused from his slumbers. "That would be telling," said one who had been over me. He took me by the arm, and assumed a confidential tone. "Can Bluebears keep a secret?" The tallest of the three broke in impatiently. "We're mugs. I'm sure you must have heard of us. We're on our way to Anagramataf. Would you care to come with us?" From the Encyclopedia of Marvels, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zimonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Mugs, the nomadic desert tribe resident in the Demerara Desert of Zimonia, thrown together by chance. This is an ad hoc community of social dropouts and outcasts who sought salvation in solitude, but failed to find it, and formed a nomadic tribal association whose numbers are still growing. If the Mugs find persons lost or suffering from hardship in the desert, they take them under their wing and into their tribe regardless of status, wealth, gender, or the dimension from which they had come. Avowedly unwilling to lead a conventional, orderly, middle-class existence, the Mugs pursue their own ideals of freedom, leisure, and independence, preferably in extreme temperatures. The Mugs are sociable, hospitable, fond of animals, and firmly opposed to altercations of any kind. They readily espouse muddled socio-political ideas and have a predilection for bizarre names. They are expert camedary breeders, camedary thee, and have for some years been roaming the Demerara Desert in quest of a legendary city named Anagramataf. The Mug's clothing consists of a length of dark blue mug wool, a wool obtained from a blue edible mushroom, which also plays a predominant role of the Mug's diet, mugrum thee. Several yards long, this cloth is wound several times around the body and head until no ray of sunlight can reach the skin. Two miniature periscopes are always worn at eye level because the Mugs make a habit of burying themselves when sandstorms are imminent and like to keep a lookout. It may have been because I was sleepy or because I was still eager to put as much distance as possible between me and the great forest, but I accepted the Mugs' invitation without a second thought. Another incentive was the casual, friendly way in which they treated me. At least none of them wanted to dissolve my body with some purulent secretion and devour me. That betokened something of an improvement on my recent company. My admission to the Mug tribe was gratifyingly informal and unbureaucratic. I was swathed in a length of dark blue cloth. I politely declined the periscopes, and someone loudly called out, "Anagramataf," whereupon all the other Mugs bellowed the same two words. Then the caravan set off, and I simply trotted along with it. After a while I was approached by one of the Mugs, who asked if I was hungry and would like some mugrum to eat. From the Encyclopedia of Marvels, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zimonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale. Mugrum, the, biologically speaking, a rather inadequate description of the lower Zimonian cactoid mushroom, which thrives exclusively in certain areas of the Demerara Desert. The lower Zimonian cactoid mushrooms grows only in layers of soil that are situated far below sea level, exposed to strong solar radiation, and provided with an adequate sugar content. This hybrid plant possesses very great nutritional value, together with other qualities that are particularly prized by the Mugs. The Mugs lived almost entirely on this blue cactoid mushroom, so now that I was by way of being honorary Mug, so did I. We were in a desert, after all, and there was little else to eat unless you fancied sugar or knew how to catch and cook venomous electric adders or hydroscorpions. Mugrooms grew under almost every sizable stone in the Demerara Desert, never went out of season, and they were easy to pick and preserve. When you've eaten a lot of mugrooms, and the mugrooms ate them all the time, you get into a stupidly emotional frame of mind. For one thing, you attribute far greater importance to all that you see and all that happens than it merits. For another, everything strikes you as funny in some way. Most of the Mugs were in a permanent state of ecstatic hilarity, and we often had to halt the entire caravan because some of the members of the tribe were so tickled by the sight of a cactus leaf or a fold in the dunes that couldn't be persuaded to move on. The Mugs were forever laughing and chuckling, and someone was always having a fit of the giggles. The caravan made it a rule to halt during these paroxysms of mirth. A mug in this condition was known to be quite helpless and could not be left in the desert on his own. It might happen to anyone, after all. Many such paroxysms went on for hours, and the victims had to be tied to a camadere's hump to enable the caravan to proceed. Other spasms were so infectious that the whole caravan was gradually overcome and ended up rolling around on the ground. In consequence, our progress was rather slow. And on the other hand, it was the mug room which ensued that the mugs made any progress at all. Its effects were such that the simple act of walking acquired a dreamlike quality. You could march for hours without getting tired and remained in the best of spirits. It felt as if you were traversing the moon on 10-foot legs made of chewing gum, even when trudging up a sand dune in murderous temperatures. Versatile mushrooms. Mug rooms tasted delicious, I might add, having a flavor midway between tuna and roast pork with a faint appetizing hint of sage. They were the tastiest and most effective when eaten raw, and least effective when roasted or boiled. They could also be grilled or steamed, pureed, or fried in oil and preserved. When dried and packed in airtight containers, they kept almost indefinitely, though concentrated mug room taste lasted even longer. When pounded with a mixture of salt and ant oil compressed into little balls that could be chewed for hours. When boiled up with desert sugar and vanilla, then cooled and broken into squares, they made delicious mugroom toffee. Finely ground mugrooms were used to season mugroom dishes, though this struck me as nonsensical as seasoning lemons with lemon juice. All you had to avoid were the thorns, which contained a lethal poison. Prick yourself on one and you were dead before you hit the ground. Without its thorns, however, the mugroom was quite harmless. You had only to remove the bones, so to speak. Traveling by camedere gave me a certain amount of trouble at first. Riding that desert beast isn't exactly comfortable and takes a lot of getting used to. On horseback, you feel as if you're moving in time to classical music. A camedere seems to progress to the beat of a drum played by a drunk. It put its feet down in a wholly arbitrary order, sometimes favoring a forefoot, sometimes a hindfoot, and is forever tripping itself up. It sways first right, then left, falls to its knees and struggles up again. If I ever have in my life suffered from anything akin to seasickness, it was on a camedere in the middle of the desert, not aboard some ship on the high seas. The mug's secret. I would dearly have liked to know what the mugs looked like under their dark blue robes, but they made a great secret of this. As I discovered in the course of time, they traveled, slept, and even bathed with their bodies entirely shrouded in those peculiar lengths of cloth. What a mug looked like in the nude was one of the greatest mysteries of the Demerara Desert. According to an anthropologist who had specialized in the subject and written a dozen or more books about it, mugs were one-time alpine imps who had suffered from total hair loss and were so ashamed of this that they had swathed themselves in dark blue robes and took refuge in the desert. I myself do not subscribe to this theory. It is based solely on 3 alpine imp hairs, which the aforesaid anthropologist found in a crevice halfway between the Impic Alps and the Demerara Desert. Life in the caravan was exceptionally harmonious. Disputes, altercations, problems, etc., were wholly repugnant to the mugs, who always sought the most acceptable solution. Even when they disagreed on which way to go, they sometimes did. They didn't take a vote in the matter because a vote would have betokened a conflict. They compromised by adopting a zigzag course. The mugs were fond of music, but only of homemade music produced by homemade instruments, which they liked to play around their campfires at night. It wasn't particularly good music, in my opinion. It was more of a way of making a soothing music that would lull anyone to sleep. Most of the instruments into which the mugs hummed in a melodious way consisted of dried cactus stalks and hollowed out and stripped of their thorns. Others had drum skins made from camedere udders and were beaten very slowly. Those mugs who didn't play instruments simply swayed to the beat and conveyed their appreciation of the musician's efforts by uttering an occasional encouraging mugly. Finally, tired out after the long day's march and sedated by the music, we would all subside into the dust of the desert floor and fall asleep. We must have presented an astonishing sight as we trekked across the desert like a procession of dark blue giggling mummies, despite their uniform outward appearance. Mugs were staunch individualists. This made something of a walking paradox, a community of lone wolves, welded into a pack by force of circumstance. The mugs had rules like every community, but they were so refreshingly different from the traditional rules and regulations that it was almost a pleasure to obey them. 12 in number, they had been discovered by the monks in a so-called desert message in a bottle, the Desert Postal Service. These messages in a bottle were always turning up in the Demerara Desert. They are often, especially in an emergency, the only means of sending an SOS. You cork up your messages in glass bottles and insert them in a drifting dune, in the often illusory hope that it will forward them fast. Sadly, drifting dunes are thoroughly unpredictable where speed and direction are concerned, so the chances of their ending up in the right hands are very slim. The message that the mugs found must have been in transit for a very long time because the paper was yellow with age and the writing on it faded in an old-fashioned script. However, since a violent sandstorm blew up just as they were unfolding it, they construed this as an omen and made the 12 rules on it their code of conduct. They read as follows. 1. Honor the mug-room. 2. Thou shalt not address a white cockerel by name. 3. Thou shalt eat no wood. 4. If thou seest 2 sticks lying on top of the other, thou shalt walk backwards over them, and thy left foot first, not forwards with thy right. Moreover, thou shalt not devour them. 5. Should a vulture's shadow fall across a fire that has gone out, thou shalt rekindle it 3 times, or a great misfortune will ensue. 6. If thou cross a path of white cockerel seated on 2 superimposed sticks, thou shalt not strike it, nor shalt thou address it by name, nor partake of the said sticks. 7. Thou shalt bear a name unlike any other in the entire universe. On encountering one of thy brethren, thou shalt address him by his full name, without a single slip of the tongue. I shall, in due course, have a tale to tell about this innocuous-sounding rule. 8. Should a vulture's shadow fall across a white cockerel seated on 2 charred sticks in the ashes of a dead fire, thou art in a deplorable predicament. Notwithstanding this, thou shalt not illegible, nor address the cockerel by name, nor devour the sticks, nor strike the vulture, nor greet thy brother in an inadequate fashion. 9. Thou shalt not finkle backwards. Since none of the monks knew what finkling entailed, no one could do it. Consequently, this rule was one of the easiest to keep. 10. Thou shalt not finkle forwards. See Rule 9. 11. Thou shalt not sleep on a dune that drifts in the direction of the rune. That drifts in the direction of noon. Should it drift towards evening, thy time has come. 12. Thou shalt betake thyself to the city named Anagramataf, and when thou hast found it, trap it, and make it thy home for evermore. Since there were no white cockerels in the desert, and I genuinely had no intention of eating any wood, I had no problem with the rules other than my failure to understand them completely. I found the last rule the most puzzling of all. How did one trap a city? My own view is that none of these rules should be taken too seriously. The truth was, I suspected that they had been written under the influence of sunstroke, but I didn't say as much to the mugs for fear of hurting their feelings. And so, on the strength of a crack-brained message in the bottle, the mugs had devoted themselves to the task of finding, trapping, and occupying a city named Anagram Ataf. This was not an entirely new idea, it should be added, but the mugs were the only community to have adopted it as their mission in life. Anagram Ataf. The legend of Anagram Ataf, a city situated somewhere in the Demerara Desert, which many claimed to have seen in the distance but none had ever entered, had been current in Zamodian for hundreds of years. It was rumored to be a pleasanter place to live in than anywhere else on Earth. There were no rents to pay, no crime, no air pollution, plenty of parking places for camaraderies, and so on. Everything, in fact, that anyone could want of a dream city in the desert, such at least were the idyllic conditions reputed to prevail there. Many people could describe the place, at least from the outside, a city of low white buildings, with red and gold roofs interspersed with numerous shady palm trees and an occasional slender minaret. Nothing spectacular, in other words, just a typical oasis city of medium size, but anyone who tried to enter it found that it shrank away like a timid deer and vanished into the desert. It was precisely because no one had ever seen Anagram Ataf from the inside that it had acquired such a legendary reputation. Adventurers surmised the existence of fabulous treasures, the old and frail of medicinal springs or fountains of eternal youth, gluttons of a land of milk and honey. Many people even believed that Anagram Ataf was the gateway to the Garden of Eden, and had set out to find it, but none had ever quite got there. The desert was littered with the bleached and sand-blasted bones of those who had pursued this phantom of a city ever further into the waterless waste. Moreover, no one ever evolved a reasonably convincing scientific theory about this phenomenon. No one, that is to say, except Professor Nightingale. From the Encyclopedia of Marvels, Life Forms, and Other Phenomena of Zamonia and Its Environs by Professor Abdullah Nightingale, Anagram Ataf. This is a semi-stable Fata Morgana, or a semi-solid mirage in the shape of an oasis city, situated in the so-called Demerara Desert, an arid tract of land in the continent of Zamonia, and temperatures exceeding 320 degrees Fahrenheit. The sugar of which the Demerara Desert consists begins to melt, sugar flux, releasing a cloud of fine sugar vapor. If the temperature drops sharply at that moment, e.g. because of sudden catabolic winds, the sugar hardens in midair, and if in addition the image of real oasis city is projected on the crystallizing sugar molecules, its layout can become permanently imprinted on them. This produces the semi-solid mirror image of a city that can be blown hither or thither by the wind, creating the impression that it is moving of its own volition. I, on the other hand, took the view that Anagram Ataf had resulted from centuries of mugroom eating, and from the monotony of the desert, that it was the idealized image of a city dreamed up by people half dead from thirst, but still I had no intention of depriving the mugs of their dreams. Anagram Ataf was the only thing that kept them going. The mugs roamed by day and slept at night. I myself considered this nonsensical, because it would have been much easier for them to make progress during the relatively cool nights than in the scorching heat of day. They would have consumed less water and found their bearings more easily. There were hardly ever any clouds over the Demerara Desert, so the night sky was always clear and well lit, particularly when the moon was full, thanks to the highly reflective crystalline surface. But the mugs feared the night in a way that reminded me of the mini-pirates. When dusk approached, they looked for a campsite near the source of water. It was always a great pleasure to watch the mugs searching for an underground reservoir. They began by consuming vast quantities of mugrooms to sensitize themselves to the proximity of a spring. Then they tottered across the twilight desert with their arms outstretched like inebriated albatrosses. If a mug began to rotate on the spot and hum like a top, it meant that he had found a watercourse. The others had to then hurry to his assistance because he couldn't stop spinning by himself. Many mugs, having mistakenly strayed too far from the goop in search of water, continued to rotate for hours before they were found. This left them feeling dizzy for days, and care had to be taken to prevent them from falling off their camaraderies again and again. Alarming stories. Once a source of water had been found in a temporary borehole sunk. Huge campfires of camaraderie dung were kindled, and everyone sat down to talk and make music. The monks' conversations abounded in old wives' tales about the threats night presented. The most innocuous stories concerned sugar gnomes, more of them later, but others were considerably more frightening and bloodthirsty. There was, for instance, the legend of the dark men who were made of night and had stars for eyes. Unwitting monks who traveled by night were borne up into the sky by these creatures and then hurled to earth, burning up like meteorites on the way. The monks spoke in whispers of huge snakes that looked in the dark like dunes that could swallow the whole caravans in one single gulp. They also told the story of the drowsy dunes that slept all day to awaken at dusk and transform themselves into treacherous quicksands. They knew stories about wind sand and cactus sprites that did their dirty work in the dark, about invisible crevices, deadly scorpions, desert demons, and sand pirates. These tales were reason enough to avoid traveling at night. Light a ring of campfires around the caravan each evening, and spend the night in the shelter of the flames and the tribe.